Today we're going to be talking about weaponized convenience inside the rise of remote tool abuse. And before I begin, show of hands, who's part of an organization that currently uses some sort of remote management tool, some centralized remote management software to help? Awesome. And that's something that a lot of organizations are kind of going towards, and our talk is going to be specifically talking about that.
Yeah, so starting off, my name is Fernando Tomlinson. I've been with Mandiant about 3 years now. I'm a technical manager focused on incident response. Prior to that, I was in the Army for about 20 years, retired there, did a lot of great things. I'm also a cybersecurity adjunct professor, love giving back to the community. That's the only way we're really going to progress here. And then there's a couple of other projects that I do outside of work.
My name is Nader Zaveri. I'm a senior manager of Mandiant, part of incident response and remediation. I work hand in hand with Fernando and his team during an incident response. We're the containment remediation arm. So as he is investigating the incident, we're there side by side trying to plug the holes the attacker was able to utilize and try to kick them out. I've been with Mandiant for about over 7 years now, overarching 15 years of cybersecurity experience. And really anything from cloud and on-prem attacks, that's kind of where I usually live, especially in the cloud. So I want to kind of walk through what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about what are remote access tools or remote monitoring management. So RMMs and RAT, we're going to be using them kind of interchangeably. What are they on a level set when we're saying RAT tools or remote monitoring and management tools? What do we mean by that? We're going to also talk about some statistics on some of the abuse that we've seen with RMMs or RATs from our own investigations. We'll go through some case studies, 3 of them, and then also going through how you can threat hunt and detect. So we're going to go through actual real life case studies, but also give you some tools. And Fernando has been able to put together some really cool scripts for you to utilize that is publicly available for you to utilize to try to do some of these extra hunting. And at the end, of course, we're going to talk about how we can harden, how we can try to limit the impact of a lot of these remote tool abuse. And then at the very, very end, we're going to actually talk about some additional resources. So there's resources that we've made and also folks like CISA and the JCDC. So first things first, kind of a little bit of a housekeeping items from the Mandiant perspective. As I mentioned, we're going to be sprinkling actual real life case studies and IRs. We are going to, of course, be as accurate as possible, but also obfuscate some of the information so we can protect our clients as much as possible. But you're still going to get the information, but we're going to try to obfuscate a little bit of the specifics. What are remote access tools or remote monitoring and management, RMMs? RMMs is the official kind of, if you look at the Gartner framework, that's kind of what they originally call it. Within Mandiant, we call them RATs. It's a dual meaning, of course, but something that we all see a lot. So one thing, first things first, it is from an administration use, it is great. Improves productivity. I see a lot of people with organizations that utilize it. And especially for small and medium-sized organizations or even large organizations, this is actually a great way to help productivity, drive the collaboration, as well as provide technical support. So you won't have your service desk or help desk folks remoting into all these machines. You're going through a kind of management framework that has a management console that then they can kind of remote in. Because it is very lucrative from an organizational aspect, you can bet it's also lucrative from a threat actor perspective. One, blends in with the traffic, especially if the organization already utilizes remote tools. Most of the time, we see the remote tools be added by the threat actors, but sometimes we've actually seen them leverage existing remote tools. Does not really trigger security tools, because at the end of the day, it's doing what it's supposed to, right? It is there to have that remote access capability. So when you're thinking from a lateral movement perspective, the types of things that you should see, your security tools, if it's already excluded, you probably put in some exclusions from your EDRs, that's going to kind of blend in. Ease of setup, because once you have it set up from a management side, or if a threat actor comes in, it's just a simple login, and then now it can start to talk back out. Bypasses firewall rules. As I mentioned, you're probably already creating some exception policies, some bypassing firewall rules, so then the remote tool can actually do what it's supposed to, right? And then if you have any sort of management control policies, any sort of SCPs or Azure policies or any sort of group policies to kind of block that, it's going to probably bypass it because the organization has already said we're going to go this route. Or it might be a tool that the threat actor installed that your organization was not aware of. A little bit later, we'll talk about a script we put together that has 50 to 60 different remote tools that we've seen through incident responses. So if you block one, another 5 will kind of appear, hence the RAT terminology. Facilitate multiple intrusions, especially when you start to think of if they're able to compromise one of the types of major tools. If you think of, if anyone remembers the Kaseya breach 3-4 years ago, where not only they have the RMM toolkit, but also the ability to facilitate the possibility of going downstream to multiple clients, right? That's the possibility if they were to even compromise a remote management tool organization. So some statistics. So we want to talk about, we know what it is, but like, why are you here? Like, we know it's a possibility, but how bad is it? So literally last year, we started to see kind of an influx of remote management tool abuse. And then you start to see ransomware groups starting to use Lockbit, the Muddy Water. There is Fortinet vulnerability that then utilized some of the RMM tools. You have multiple threat actors leveraging it. So you have multiple threat actor organizations that are starting to leverage and piggyback off of it. We have multiple times where CISA comes out and says they publish a hardening guide because it got so rampant and it got so pervasive that they had to put out a bulletin. Usually when you get a bulletin from CISA, meaning it is very pervasive and rampant, but also they put together a hardening guide, which we'll be talking about from the additional sources. But from a prevalence of the management perspective, around 10% of our incident responses from last year utilize some sort of remote management tools. And right now, I want to kind of put this into perspective based off of what we see in 2023 and what is the foreseeable future for RMMs. As I mentioned, it is something a lot of organizations are kind of going towards. The market capacity, the amount of market share is going to increase drastically. So right now we see 10%, but I think as we progress throughout the years, that is also going to increase because the market share is going to increase. So that's something to look out for. We want to be able to talk about this now, put together some sort of hardening, put together threat detections before we move on to the possibility of, seeing it more rampant. So now I want to walk through, when you're talking about a remote management tool, what is a typical kind of connection flow like? So first things first, a system connects to like a broker or relay server. And that broker or relay server assigns that system an ID. For example, in this one, we have an ID for Workstation 1 and then an ID for Workstation 2. Workstation 1 wants to initiate connection with Workstation 2. So it says, hey, I want to connect to that system, but they do it through, like a lot of times through a specific client-side ID that they have been assigned. That then broker relay is able to bridge that connection that allows Workstation 1 to connect to Workstation 2, either through if you've ever been part of some sort of remote assistance, you get that click like, hey, someone wants to take over your session, would you allow that? So sometimes that is, that's of course we want to have that, but also sometimes it is hidden authentication where, unintended access is configured.
Yeah, so now that we get kind of what that looks like from a flow perspective, let's jump into one of our case studies. The first one is AnyDesk. So looking at this from an overview perspective, this was one where there was third-party notification. Actually, do I sound all right? Because it seems like I'm echoing all right. And outside of the third-party notification, what's come to light is that the threat actor actually exploited their public-facing password reset platform. I won't name what the platform was. However, it was really easy for the attacker to do. It was super old. The attacker was able to elevate their rights to DA, domain admin, and then they were able to leverage AnyDesk to ultimately get to the point of their financial system and then utilize a race condition to gain access to funds. So from a timeline perspective, it looks more like this. Password reset application gets exploited. The attacker then leverages AnyDesk so that way they have persistence. They then laterally moved over to the domain controller. We already know that's one of the next steps for an attacker. From there, they conducted recon. What's interesting here is that since they had an interactive session via AnyDesk, they were able to they were able to open up Active Directory users and computers, like the graphical representation. And that's what they were using for recon. Now, I'm typically a fan of people adding descriptions in AD. This is a time where it didn't really work out well for the client because the attacker was easily able to identify the Exchange server, the file server, just off of the description, not off the naming convention. They also were able to identify the financial management system, which is certainly enticing to any threat actor. So they made their way over there and laid down AnyDesk as well. Now, the financial management system is where the analyst uses the platform to then create ACH files to pay whomever. And the way that the platform works is she logs in or they log in, they create the ACH with whomever is going to, amount, routing information, what have you. It gets downloaded and then they open up the URL to the bank and then they upload it. Nonetheless, the attacker had leveraged AnyDesk and monitored the location in which the ACH file gets downloaded to. Each time it's the same location. And then they would hurry up and leverage AnyDesk to log in, change the actual ACH file with the routing number of their choosing. Now, we identified that the threat actor had did this 60 to 70 times. They got lucky, is what I would call it, 5 times, and then they walked away with $6 million. So it was kind of interesting because each time it's like threat actors trying to get there and they were a couple of seconds, maybe a minute too late, and then they got lucky a couple of times. So looking at this in terms of artifacts and things that we were able to leverage from an analysis perspective, it kind of looks like the next couple of slides, but I'll talk about some things that are super helpful to know at large when it comes to the application. So AnyDesk has 3 execution modes. There's 2 portable versions. Essentially, it's not installed. And then there's an installed version where it actually creates a service associated with it. In this case, the attacker did not care, so they just installed it as a service. From a log perspective, program data, and then we have several other log locations as well. Didn't necessarily matter from that aspect, whether it was installed or portable. And for anyone who's done forensics for longer than a day, you know, when you're looking at log files, first thing you want to identify is what time zone are we working with here. So thankfully it's in UTC for us, so we don't have to do any type of math associated with it. A log file that was very, very useful and fruitful is the connection_trace.txt. And an example of that is shown before you, and I'll just kind of step through the main points of it. So we already noted the timestamps and we note that those are in UTC. But then that third column where you start to see past WD and user and rejected and all that other stuff, that is a notation in terms of how the threat actor or anyone was connecting to the machine. So user would be an insinuation of the threat actor connected to the machine, a pop-up appeared, and the user that was already logged into the machine clicked approved or clicked denied, right? In this case, they would have clicked approved and that would have rendered as user. Rejected would be the same thing, except they clicked it disapprove or deny, whatever the option is for the applicable platform itself. And then password and token, that is where we get into the unattended access. And this is where the threat actors that we've investigated associated with the platform really thrive in what they like to use, because that doesn't require any interaction from a user who may already be on there. Password is essentially unattended access is enabled. However, it pops up for the threat actor to put in a password that they've already chosen when they installed and set up the actual AnyDesk client. And then token is where the password is already saved. So they're able to like essentially double click on the actual icon for the client, and then it seamlessly logs them in. As you could imagine, that last one is the most lucrative for them, right? They're lazy in nature. But the other thing that we get here, we get the actual IDs. So from an investigation standpoint, if I can trace IDs back to other installations within the environment, great. If I can't, that is an opportunity for us to maybe pass it off to law enforcement or try to work with AnyDesk in terms of that.
And usually, majority of the times where we had requested law enforcement, they've been very helpful. A lot of these remote management tools, they've been very helpful in trying to get us the information and get, if we can't get a lot of the information from a specific incident response.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Other logs that may be useful here is AD trace. And the AD trace essentially contains generalized data in terms of when we're talking about an installed version of any desk. Installed version, we're going to look at AD_service.trace. And this is where we can start to get the actual IPs. If there were files that were downloaded, uploaded, any features, PIDs, things of that nature. And this is the more fruitful aspect. So if I can come in and get one file, this would be the one that I'm looking for. An example of what that file actually looks like is shown before you. So in the screenshot up top, we have what I'm going to call the local machine. And then the screenshot below, we'll call that the remote machine, the machine that we're going to remote into or access any desk on, for lack of better words. You'll also note in parentheses for each one, there's an ID 430 something and then 669 something. So in the log, we are able to find the entry where we are connecting to that 669 ID. We also see the IP that we are connecting from. So if we're in an environment where it's DHCP, maybe that machine had a different IP at that time and we're not able to trace it back into DHCP server or what have you, that's where that may come into play for us. Now, on the actual remote machine, we can see that we're accepting a request from a particular ID, that 430, and we also see the IP associated with that machine. Now, I don't know about you, but I only want to look at this log in this form one time because this isn't helpful for me on the eyes and I might miss something. So we'll talk about some ways to really parse this and make it easier for you, the analyst, so you can spend your hard-earned time on something else more fruitful. Although this was not observed in this particular use case, it is worth noting that if I were on the red team and I were developing a C2 platform, something like AnyDesk or any other remote management platform would be kind of like my wish list, and Nader mentioned that. In this example here, we note that the platform has the ability to take screenshots. We can also capture screen recordings. All right, so all of those things from an adversary perspective would be lucrative to them. However, something that, from a blue team perspective, we may not be aware of. And again, we didn't note that the threat actor had leveraged this, but it is worth noting that it is available. This we absolutely noted they used. And when I first ran across this, what we'll call a feature right now, I was kind of shocked a little bit. So most of us may have heard of the concept of tunneling. Right? And we recognize that threat actors like to use that to ultimately get to an ultimate end state or a system of their choosing. So in this example, AnyDesk actually has a built-in tunneling functionality. So we have Workstation 1 and Workstation 2. Both of them have AnyDesk installed. We also have Workstation 3. Threat actor has compromised Workstation 1 and cannot get to Workstation 3 directly. However, Workstation 2 can connect to or interact with Workstation 2. So through the functionality, we can set up a tunnel through AnyDesk where we can ultimately get to Workstation 2 and have that connection brokered over to Workstation 3, essentially tunneling our communication through another machine via AnyDesk. So we saw a threat actor doing that. No worries though, the logs associated with that are actually pretty robust in terms of that overarching log. But again, we're going to show you a couple of ways to kind of tease that out.
For Workstation 3, did that also need to have AnyDesk?
It did not. No, just by virtue of Workstation 2 being able to talk to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about another case study. And this is ConnectWise Screen Connect. So another internal notification. This one ultimately ended in ransomware. It was a long day for everybody involved. But nonetheless, it started with the download of a admin tool by a sysadmin, going out there doing, what they're paid to do. However, a ad for a particular tool was laced and really started the whole chain of events. Threat actor did some exfilling, all of this enabled by the use of Screen Connect in the environment. From a timeline perspective, user downloads the admin tool, again, laced. It had a credential harvester. And the credentials that were harvested out of the user's browser were the domain admin creds. And then the actual URL was the URL to their RDS gateway. So sometimes the threat actor gets creds, sometimes they get a URL. This time they got both, and it was an elevated account. Threat actor just logged directly into their RDS gateway and then begin remoting into machines. Recognizing that this may not be a good viable solution for them long term, they actually started installing Screen Connect on machines. And then over time, they began downloading their toolkit, which the logs are okay, they could be better. We're going to show that. And then they started exfilling data via that as well. And that is the avenue in which they leverage to deploy ransomware in the environment. So from a Screen Connect perspective, there's two different installation methods, on-prem or in the cloud. Really, on-prem is not lucrative to a threat actor. The cloud is where it's at, because you can go out there and you get a 14-day trial and it doesn't require a credit card. Now, it is worth noting that the company is trying to lessen the misuse of the platform. And by doing so, they've actually begun to block temporary email providers of sorts. But I could spin up a Gmail and kind of still go to town there. From a log perspective, we see where that's at. Let's dive a little bit into a couple of logs. One of them is actually user config. And what's highlighted there, or what's circled, is any directory that a file was uploaded from, it actually logs it. So while it doesn't give me the names of the file, if I start to see directories that would contain sensitive data or different areas, I know that I should start focusing my attention there. The other aspect here with app config is many of you have probably used a remote access tool, and you note when you log in, maybe the screen changes to black. Maybe there's a banner or something to let the person know that somebody is in their machine. Well, from a ConnectWise perspective, those things are customizable. So we noted the threat actor was going in and it's like, change the screen black? No, disable. Put a banner up? No, disable that. They're turning off all the things that will let the person know somebody is there, so that way they can kind of go unimpeded. From an event log perspective, I think one of the big ones that stands out is 7045. Again, this is going to get created as a service, the actual agent. And what we get out of there is we get the actual tenant ID itself. So again, going back to law enforcement, working with actual ConnectWise itself, we can get a little bit more information. From a logging perspective in the event logs, well, these could stand a little bit more work. So when an account actually connects to the machine, we get the name of the actual account and we see that a connection is made. When the disconnection happens, we see the same thing. And then that third one, we're able to see the name of the actual file once it's been uploaded to the actual machine that's being remoted into. Here, I mean, we got beacon.exe, but literally it will be a.txt or whatever. So your mileage will certainly vary there. It doesn't capture the hash or anything of that nature. From a command execution perspective, this log could actually could use a little work as well, in the sense of it doesn't tell you what commands are explicitly executed through the application. Instead, it will tell you the length of the command. So in ConnectWise or Screen Connect, there are some pre-baked commands because it's a remote management platform. So the system checks in periodically and has kind of like system info. Whenever a process list is executed, that is noted as 657 characters. So if I were to see this log with 657 characters, I would lean my assessment to believe that a process list was retrieved. However, that isn't necessarily the case with everything. For example, at the bottom, we see that PowerShell TAC command get process was executed. Again, a way to do it outside of the internal platform. And that command itself is 33 characters. So there's really not a good way for us to make that determination in the inherent Screen Connect logs themselves. From the perspective of what the threat actor sees, though, they see a platform like this or a UI like this. And off to the left, they have a list of machines. They can do one machine, they can do many machines. And then over to the right, where we see that red box up and down, beneath it and below it, there are a number of options. The option that we're on now is PowerShell, but there's other options where we can get event logs. We can get the last user that's logged in. We can get a screenshot of who's currently on there right now, services, all kinds of stuff. But from an arbitrary code execution perspective, we see that we can literally just type in the command. We see what the command is shown as within the UI, and then it shows the results right back in there. Again, the bad part or the less than desirable part here is something like who am I just shows up in the logs on the actual distant end as a length of 6, right? So we recognize the threat actor kind of has a leg up here, but there are a couple of things that we can look at. This, we did see a threat actor utilize, and it kind of, we found ourselves kind of taken aback initially when we first identified this. So whenever a client is installed and checks in for the first time, you can have it execute specific commands. And that's what's being done here with triggers. So the top circled box, essentially, it's the first time the client's checked in. That's what that is telling us. And then when it does that, the second red box is what we want it to actually do. So here, we're just getting the actual IP listing, but typically, or in the past, we've seen threat actors go into the registry and mess with it. So that way, if somebody were to get a service listing, then it wouldn't show that this is installed as a service. And what really honed us in on this was we would see ConnectWise being installed, and almost immediately, we're talking within a second or two or less than 5 seconds, we would see this type of activity start to take place in the registry. And then looking into it more, we begin to identify that.
Yep. And our third case study is around Beyond Trust, BombGuard, and really a little bit overview of the investigation. Another third-party notification where we noticed a constant brute force of accounts where the threat actor was able to access around 15 systems. We see them search file shares for passwords. This is something that's constantly happening both at if you have like a SharePoint or OneDrive, but also file shares within a traditional on-prem directory. They were able to get to ntds.dit and create a snapshot of it. And the cool thing is they were actually exfilling the ntds.dit via OneDrive. And actually, we're going to be showing some really cool videos. As Nando mentioned, the ability for screen recordings and taking pictures of sessions is there. Specifically with Beyond Trust BombGuard, it is always doing that if you have that feature enabled. So what we did is this is actually real life attackers going through. So I'm going to walk through this. So this is actually the attacker. We have a video of the attacker going on and looking for AD Explorer. As an ex-sysadmin, AD Explorer is a great tool where you can really be able to have the quick Active Directory users and computers, full listing, and perform a lot of reconnaissance. So this is him logging in, and you're going to see login, and he's going to extract it, connect to AD Explorer. He'll put in the credentials that he's already harvested, as I mentioned before. He's already got the ability to log in. And this is them being able to log in, and they'll see the entire tree. There's the entire tree structure. So after they're able to do that, this is where the reconnaissance happens. I think Nando mentioned in the previous case, when they have ADUC or Active Directory users and computers, they can do their own reconnaissance just through the UI, right? Instead of having to type out some PowerShell, some DS queries. So they're able to go through that entire thing. After they're able to go through this, we actually have another video where, as I mentioned, they're trying to exfiltrate ntds.dit via their OneDrive. And what we have is them logging into their Microsoft tenant, whatever they have. So they're logging in, and what you're gonna see actually is them putting their username and password. I guess they fat finger the password. So they make a mistake. And the cool thing is, as they're typing in the password again, they hit the little eye icon so you can show the password. So we were able to see the password. Wasn't very complex, by the way, just bad password hygiene, even from the threat actors. And you start to see them go through that. And once they're in, that's where they're able to transfer into the ntds.dit over there to their own OneDrive. So as there's mentioning of the ability for remote management tools to have that capability, where this is a great feature. organizations have to turn it on. It's not on by default because you could just think about the amount of data that is going to be happening. But from an investigator standpoint, we really didn't have to do a lot, right? Like, okay, here, play this video. There you go. That's our investigation, a lot of that. So we are able to have a kind of concrete way, and with BombGuard and BeyondTrust, they're able to have that. So what we want to get into is some threat hunting.
Yeah, slide please. So, it's cool that there's a couple of things going on. There's some artifacts. Let's talk about some detections though. So Elastic actually has a query of sorts, as long as you have the data, in which they're looking for a plethora of RMMs. So this is great because a lot of times I go into an environment, you've seen the playbook before, right? What kind of VPN do you get? Do you use RMMs? And most times there's not an indication or understanding whether they use them or not use them, right? So we start there. And then if you don't have Elastic, that's cool, right? You got Microsoft, let's use some PowerShell. So PowerShell script to kind of do the same thing for you. And then if you're familiar with Google SecOps, formerly known as Chronicle, Google's robust platform for log aggregation, we also have a query for you there, right? So if you're not using any one of these three, between the three, you should be able to take it, adopt it, and then make it useful for whatever platform you have. Again, this is just for detecting. So if you know you're not using any of those things in an environment and you start to see them, maybe it's shadow admin, maybe it's nefarious activity.
Yeah, so this specific query, as I mentioned earlier, it's around 50 to 60 different RMM tools. It's not all, but a lot of the big ones that we constantly see during investigations. So this is what you want to probably start tomorrow as a proactive threat hunting. You should have, okay, if we're going to do RMMs as a policy, we're using X, Y, and Z. And now if I see a bunch of these others, now we can start blocking. And I'll walk you through different ways you can block a little bit later.
Yeah, so if we're only focused on AnyDesk and ConnectWise, I do have a series of scripts out there, a series of functions rather, script for each one that's going to transform those log files that we started to talk about into something that's easily digestible from an analysis perspective, right? Like I want to watch my neighbors walk by. I don't necessarily want to parse through that raw log file all day. But nonetheless, when we transform it, it's in something that we're commonly used to, right? Maybe you like XML, maybe you like CSV, maybe you have some other platform that if you have it in JSON, for example, you can then easily ingest it into there and enrich it. Whatever the case is, that's what the scripts seek to do so you can get more of your time back, tease out the nefarious activity so you can quickly make a determination. And while this isn't an all-inclusive list of all the questions or answers that can be gleaned from the scripts, this is a good list to kind of start with, right? So largely what connections are happening in my environment based upon AnyDesk or ConnectWise. Too easy. We can parse that and then illuminate that for you. What incoming connections are happening? Is there any tunneling happen? Were there any files transmitted during those connections? Those are things that we know we want to get to from an analysis perspective that we can tease out very quickly and then help you start to make a timeline of that activity so you can start focusing in on the gaps of what you don't know currently.
And we want to now get into some of the hardening recommendations. So we know a lot of times with organizations, we want to be able to harden the way our environment is, regardless of if they're utilizing an RMM tool or not. So first things first, ensuring there's strong MFA. I can't stress this enough, not all MFA is equal. And we're starting to see that a lot, especially with, SMS being compromised. Push notifications, if you're using push notifications, we're currently on IRs that are where the threat actor is able to abuse MFA fatigue. So understanding what is the best way, FIDO2 keys, of course, using some Azure number matching, something that requires actual interaction after the code is generated, not a quick click of the button of approve. Then you have to understand the RMM software has to be updated. A lot of times if there's like a vulnerability at a specific RMM software, ensuring that is up to date and the patch has been, it came out, we want to make sure it's up to date. And then also geolocation IP restrictions. If you're logging in, if it's a SaaS-based provider, ensuring that you have a set of trusted IPs you're logging in from, if that's an internal IP or your public VPN IP. That way you can't just log, anyone from anywhere around the world can log in. You want to possibly have, if you have client-side encryption, client-side certificates, to enforce that. So then you can have that handshake be just for that one client, for the broker relay down to the client. So then not everyone can just randomly log in. You can restrict lateral movement ports. Right? Even though this is an RMM server, what are different lateral movement ports that a threat actor could possibly abuse if we were to start blocking? SSH, you're thinking about SMB, things like RDP, where we can really restrict that. But also a lot of these platforms, AnyDesk, TeamViewer, they actually have specific IP addresses from when they're talking back out. So you can actually block that at the layer 7 firewall, right? So they have specific IPs. Some of them that are very hard to see, they come through 443. But a lot of them, especially the very kind of established RMM tools, they have their own ports and protocols. So they have their own ports to say, this will only go through port 5400 or something like that. So you can block those ahead of time. This is where the proactive nature comes in play. You run that RMM tool hunting threat detection. See, we have TeamViewer, we have AnyDesk in our environment. That's not a legitimate software. If that is somebody doing it as a shadow IT function, I don't care. We need to block it, so we can block it at the layer 7 firewall. And then you can take those logs, and a lot of those logs that Nando went through, where you can try to push that off into some sort of SIM, or maybe after you parse it, you can then push that off, right? Because as Nando mentioned, some of these logs aren't the best. It's hard to kind of make sense of it, right or left, and being able to parse that a lot before pushing it off to some SIM to do some sort of correlation is going to be where it's at. As I mentioned before, we do have, there's a lot of traction that happened, especially last year, where CISA came out with a secure remote access software guide. It's about a 20-page white paper where they break down the different ways how you can securely remote, both from a consumer standpoint, but also as a RMM management tool organization. JCDC, which is the Joint Partnership, Public-Private Partnership, they also put together a similar defense plan. A lot of the same recommendations are around there, around trying to harden as much as possible the different ways, if you are to utilize some of these platforms, how can you do it? And then also we have what we normally utilize is a ransomware protection containment strategy. This strategy guide it's a deep white paper, but it really goes into blocking the lateral movement capabilities, doing these proactive things. And this is all, you can click on that. We can give you the links to it. You'll be able to download it and implement it. We'll give you screenshots, step-by-step instructions. That way you can take this type of document and start to implement it in terms of a remediation and try to harden your environment even further. And that concludes our presentation. Any questions? Yes, in the back.
Which ones?
The two that you posted.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I moved them from private to public last night. There's nothing in it right now?
They're both empty.
Okay, that's on me then. I need to learn all this stuff I can do, but I can't go private to public.
Yeah.
I'm in the wrong industry.
Yes.
The couple use cases that you presented, would have those attacks been prevented if they would have followed all of the hardening recommendations that you had gone through just a little bit ago?
Some of it. So for example, proactively, if you were to do a threat hunting of, let's say, are these RMM softwares, and if you understand that these are the softwares that I will only allow for remote management, you can proactively block a lot of these at the firewall level, right? So you can't have AnyDesk or TeamViewer. So those, as I mentioned, a lot of those have specific ports that they go out of, and you can utilize and you can block that. Of course, some of these, like I said, go through at 443, which is a lot harder. But some of that you could definitely have proactively blocked it. But not everything is a perfect fix. Great question.
All right. I want to touch on that just a little bit more and recognize that you guys may not be able to get into the level of detail for it. When you're talking about threat hunting detection, a lot of what was there was like local logs, client logs, maybe server logs with some of the services. What I wanted to touch to was on the network side of things, external visibility. You mentioned 443, for example, can be hard to distinguish. Some of these have distinct ports that that the vendors use for their applications. Have you all explored for customers that may have NetFlow or other network level traffic to be able to understand from an external visibility standpoint if you can detect, as opposed to a lot of those local on-client detections that you can engineer against?
Yeah. So outside of just the port aspect, a lot of them have actual IPs that are registered as part of their broker server list, if you will. So there's an opportunity associated with that from the network perspective. But I think that's the biggest one that I would.
Yeah, no, so I think if you're looking at from an external attack surface management, right? So where can you take that? And I think a lot of that is going to have to be proactive. So generally most attack surface managements will look at the major things, that's SSH, RDP, those types of ports that are available, that are able to talk back out. Some of these ports are not kind of mentioned, that you'll have to create your own rule of, hey, these are these ports from these management servers, management tools. We want to create a rule that says anytime any of my systems start to talk back out on these ports, we want to start to, I think these are things that are not out the box, in all honesty. I haven't seen a tool, because remember, RMM tools is usually utilized for legitimate use. But I think something as a proactive nature is taking those lists of RMM tools, seeing the ports, if they have a specific port associated with it, or the IP brokerage, IP sets, and then utilizing that as a way of detection.
Yeah, I mean, because monitoring like the border for like listening services, that's what makes RMMs great, and not a whole lot of firewall needed, right? Because generally speaking, external traffic going out on those ports, nobody's blocking that, right? So somebody being able to scan the outside and see an internal system with this RMM agent, they're not going to see it, exactly, right? Because it's not listening in that manner.
Yep, great question. Any?
We saw how bad the logging was for Screen Connect. What's made your lives easier as far as good logging goes? Like you mentioned, AnyDesk it was easier to kind of pick out information without doing that extra work. What are some of the top RMMs that have the better logging for that? If at all.
It's like a double-edged question. Like the best RMMs that threat actors have also taken advantage of.
Yeah.
I don't want to be biased here, but like Splashtop, I think, has pretty decent login. TeamViewer also. I would put that in the bucket of an AnyDesk. So the other aspect here is, the logging from the application enriches my forensic analysis from just what the OS provides. The second point to that is none of this logging is made to help enable my job, which is why some of it is a bit cryptic and we had to do a lot of research here. It's made so, yourself as a legitimate customer, when you have an issue, you can go back to them and they'll say, oh, send me the log. And then they can understand what's happening or what's not happening, right? So most of it is built with troubleshooting and support in mind and not forensics.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the logs are meant from an operational standpoint, from a troubleshooting, not from a forensic artifact
100%.
collection. And I think with the recent kind of influx, this is where you're going to start to see a lot of the RMMs, the bigger ones who have that capability. They're going to start to improve their logging, because that's something when we're going back, we're hounding them like we need better like data to be. Oh, it was terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's crazy because like as an adversary, the things that make it very lucrative to me are sometimes the things that make it difficult for the threat actor, right? So that's one of the things that's made it great. But it looks like we are at time. Great question. We'll be off to the side.
Yeah, if you have any other questions, please.
Any other questions? Yep.
Thank you very much.